So now the meeting is being recorded, so I'd like to introduce our featured guest for this talking circle, Charla Bocchicchio. So Charla is an actress and acting coach, appearing in films, TV, commercials, both locally and nationally. She started writing a blog post about her own journey of grief in 2016, after she lost her only child, 22-year-old Cassidy, to a fentanyl overdose. Through that blog, she began to find her voice as a grieving mother who would one day be okay and eventually help others by bringing into the light that many were going through the dark corners of their own minds. Charlotte now speaks at treatment centers and high schools to spread awareness about substance use disorder, bringing a message of love, acceptance, and non-judgment. She truly believes that this is the only way to fight the disease, to stop the stigma around it so it can one day seeking appropriate and effective treatment for SUD as a normal and accepted as getting treatment for diabetes or cancer. Charla lives in Salt Lake City with her husband John. When not speaking or acting, she can often be found in the yoga studio. Charla, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Like Clara said, my name is Charla, and I would like to introduce you to someone very special, my only child, my daughter, Cassidy. If this were a story of recovery, Cassidy would be here to share her story with you, but it's not. On November 11th of 2016, Cassidy died of a drug overdose. She was 22 years old. 10 years ago, Cassidy, she had her whole life ahead of her. She was in treatment. She was in recovery. Cassidy, like some of you, thought she was invincible. She thought that even though death was a possibility with the high-risk behavior she engaged in, she didn't really believe that it was a probability. But she was wrong. My daughter suffered from anxiety, depression, a personality disorder, and substance use disorder, a disease that, when left untreated, can be fatal. And in Cassidy's case, it was. This is all I have left of Cassidy now, these ashes, her burnt up body. Cassidy was my sunshine. She was my sweet baby girl, and now all that's left of her is in a plastic bag, and I can never have her back. This was Cassidy's obituary. Excuse me. You see, something that no one really thinks about is the fact that when someone dies, their parent or a family member or loved one has to find and choose a picture for the obituary, just days after the death, sometimes hours after the death. And someone has to think of the words to write for the obituary to let the world know what had happened. I could barely breathe or get myself dressed that first week, let alone take care of every detail in the aftermath of this tragedy. I picked out this photo, and Cassidy's dad wrote her obituary just hours after the police knocked at his door at 3 a.m. to inform him that his daughter was dead. I'm going to read part of the obituary. Before I move on, I don't know if you can see my image or not. Clara, can you tell me if I'm on the screen?
Yes, you are.
Okay, because on my end, I'm not. So I wanted to make sure. Thank you. So her dad wrote this obituary. Cassidy Aspen Cochran was born on June 22nd, 1994. She was a precocious child. As soon as she could talk, she was quoting lines from Shakespeare. She loved to perform for friends and family. She called herself the queen of make-believe. She was smart, so funny. Even when times got tough, she could always make you laugh. She had a huge heart. She loved animals, all animals, especially Harambe. She was so beautiful, stunning, really. She recently had plans to marry her fiancé, Frank Calzone. She loved him and he loved her. She wanted to create a life with him. She seemed genuinely happy over the past year with him. Unfortunately, Cassidy also struggled with addiction. Her addiction finally won. She died of a heroin overdose in the early morning hours of November 11th, 2016. We write this not to dishonor her memory, but to shine some light on an illness that is taking the lives of far too many. If we allow shame, guilt, or embarrassment to cause this illness to become a dark family secret, hiding in the shadows, everyone loses. Cassidy now joins the ever-expanding list of daughters, sons, sisters, brothers, and grandchildren taken far too soon by this growing healthcare epidemic. But please remember, Cassidy isn't just a statistic. She was our sunshine. Even when she kept us awake with worry, everyone on that list was the light of someone's life. Thus, it is important to remember that Cassidy wasn't just her illness. She was our daughter and our friend. Words cannot describe how much she will be missed. And then we talk about who is still alive, and we asked that at the end, that in lieu of flowers, please, we ask that you call or write your state representative and plead with them to make naloxone available over the counter without a prescription. Because at that time, it was not in many states. So there are other details that have to be taken care of in the days following a death. The hardest thing I had to do after my daughter died was to identify her dead body at the funeral home. They were kind enough to prepare her for us to view that day, even though she was not being embalmed because she was cremated. They wanted her to look nice for us. A woman at the funeral home, I found out later, took an extra hour and a half to brush Cassidy's very tangled and newly darkened hair and cleaned her face so that she would look nice for us, her parents. They placed her body in a wooden box with no lid and covered her freshly autopsied body with a nice blanket. I did not know if I would survive that day. Not knowing how to quite say goodbye to her, her dad and I sang her favorite lullaby. It's called I Bid You Good Night, with the words slightly changed just for her, a song by the Grateful Dead. We sang in our broken voices as I caressed her newly darkened hair and kissed her cold forehead, the tears steadily streaming down my cheeks. This was the aftermath. This was the life that Cassidy left behind for us, her parents that loved her, that would have gone to the ends of the earth and practically did. This was what the disease did to her, to us. To many, she was just what they saw in this photo or what they read in the obituary. We shared openly and honestly the cause of her death, and that meant that the obituary went viral for some reason. News programs got in touch with us and covered the story. So other people got a little more information about Cassidy from news stories like this one.
Did she know she was taking fentanyl?
No. A Utah mother mourns the death of her 22-year-old daughter to a drug overdose, and she's not alone.
Overdose deaths from the opioid painkiller fentanyl more than doubled in a single year here in the United States. 4,200 people died in 2014. That's according to a new report out there.
I hope that you guys have a nice time watching the show.
As a child, Cassidy Cochran had big dreams of becoming an actor like her mom.
I'm Cassidy, and I am 6.5, come from Salt Lake City, Utah.
16 years later, her mother Charla woke to a barrage of phone messages.
Okay, this is it. Like, this is the moment I've been fearing and worrying about for her whole adolescence. But it still isn't the thing you want to hear on the other end of the phone.
Last November, Cassidy died of a drug overdose. The medical examiner found high doses of fentanyl in her system, a powerful synthetic opioid.
She was my only child. We were like best buddies when she was younger.
So she was a light. I mean, you can just see in these pictures.
She definitely was. She was our sunshine.
Her parents were honest about how she died in her obituary, saying, "This is our truth." Cassidy suffered from depression and anxiety, and Charla believes her daughter self-medicated.
The first time she tried heroin was when she was 15.
Cassidy got hooked immediately. On the night she died, Cassidy and her boyfriend thought they were taking heroin. It was something far more lethal. According to the medical examiner, Cassidy unknowingly injected a lethal dose of fentanyl. On the night she relapsed, Cassidy was no match for the killer counterfeit.
You never know when it's going to be the last time.
And though they never wanted to be in the spotlight this way, Charla now fights to save others.
The more we can educate the public and our own kids when they're young, maybe by shedding some light on it, maybe we can start to see some change.
Cassidy wasn't just Charla's daughter. She could have been anyone's daughter, sister, or friend. Heather Simonson, KSL 5 News.
Cassidy was much more than her disorder, than her disease, her addiction. She was the life of the party. She was everyone's best friend. She was compassionate and kind. She was hilarious and irreverent and could literally make me laugh until I cried. She was talented and beautiful. She was charming and tortured and artistic and adventurous. She didn't care what people thought of her. She loved practical jokes. She loved show tunes and trips to New York to see Broadway shows. She believed in magic and Harry Potter. She loved to snowboard and rock climb. She went full throttle in everything she did. There was no halfway with Cassidy. She never stopped playing dress up her whole life. Like all of us, Cassidy's story had a beginning. She came into our world in the middle of the night 26 years ago now, with a gulp of air and a tiny cry. She was our perfect little angel, and we were scared and ecstatic parents for the first, and as it would turn out, the only time. Cassidy Aspen Cochran burst into our lives on June 22nd, 1994, and she immediately lit up the room. She continued to do that every day for the rest of her life. Cassidy was a precocious and a smart child. She did everything early. Just like you, she had a family that celebrated her first step, her first words, and every accomplishment she made the first year and beyond. She was adored by everyone that she met. She had charisma, even at age 1, to charm all of those she came in contact with. By about 2.5 years old, she was quoting Shakespeare and performing for others every chance she got. She would find a stage on a coffee table or the hearth of a fireplace, anywhere that she could be the center of attention, to sing, act, or dance for others. She shined brightly. She had dubbed herself the Queen of Make-A-Bee, and she ruled with grace and a little bit of bossiness. Her imagination never ended all her life. Her grandmother had instilled a love of old movies and musicals in her from a very early age, and she loved nothing more than to belt out a show tune for all to hear. As she got older, she continued after my own heart and passion for performing and acting. She was in many productions, mostly musicals, starting at about age 7. She had the voice of someone twice her age, and she could belt with the best of them. She was a star. It seeped out of her like a billion bright lights that couldn't be contained. She never quite fit the mold in school, and often we had frustrating calls from teachers. She struggled in a traditional setting at school and started to show early signs of anxiety and depression, among other issues. Once she started middle school, social pressures weighed heavy, and she struggled even more with depression and anxiety. I remember when her friends began a dialogue that, little did I know, would be the beginning of a more serious issue to come. Her friends had reached out to me because they were worried about Cassidy. Turns out that she had started cutting. That led to substance use to numb her emotional pain. She started drinking at an early age with friends, which led to other more serious substances, eventually finding pills to numb the angst. Cassidy always went to extremes, She went from one unhealthy boyfriend to the next, and chaos always followed her. Home life became very hard and dramatic at times, and the substances got more and more serious until this happened. This picture was taken on her 15th birthday. This is her before. You see, Cassidy used heroin for the first time at age 15. Just a few months after this photo was taken. She had no idea then the toll that it would take on her life. We found out that she was using heroin when her then boyfriend overdosed in our home while we were gone, and she had called 911. He survived, and the rest of us were left with a wake-up call. We did everything in our power to help her once we found out. We sent her to rehab, long-term treatment centers, therapy. We never gave up on her. It took a toll on our jobs, our family, our whole world. And as you know, it eventually took her life. Initially, Cassidy resisted us in our attempts to help and the idea of extended treatment. She used all the negative tools of manipulation, lying, tantrum throwing to avoid coming to treatment. We even had to give her a sedative that her doctor prescribed just to get her on the airplane to get her to a residential treatment center in St. George from Birmingham, Alabama, where we lived. In her first month in long-term treatment at Sunrise was the name of the treatment center, she would write letters to us saying that she was being abused, mistreated, starved, neglected. There were no depths to which she would sink to try to avoid facing the truth about her life. I mean, after all, she was young. Things didn't seem real. Consequences certainly weren't real. After a couple months of fighting things in residential treatment, she finally had her epiphany. She made the decision to start to help herself. My daughter was like a light switch, either all on or all off. And once she made that decision, she not only chose treatment, she decided that she was going to take all of her new friends with her. Cassidy always had a heart of gold. And once her eyes were open to a better life, she was determined to help everyone else around her get well too. That's who she was. She was a natural leader. She started to rally her new friends to join her in defeating the disease that had gotten a hold of her and refused to let go. She started to journal quite a bit and write to us at home, apologizing for all the things that she had put us through. She knew we loved her unconditionally. She started to understand the consequences of her actions. Cassidy started to heal. I allowed myself for the first time in a long time to be hopeful for our future as a family and finally having my little girl back. All the dreams a mom has for her daughter, sending Cassidy off to college, helping her pick out a wedding dress, making plans for her wedding, picking out things to furnish a new apartment, and finally holding her hand as I see my first grandbaby be born, holding my baby's baby, singing to them as I did to their mother when she was a baby in my arms. I was hopeful again, and that she would continue using the skills that would help her stay clean. After she left Sunrise, we were so proud that she had decided to live, and to live a life that was full of joy and love rather than anguish and sorrow. But then about 2 months after she had come home for good, she disappeared for the night, found her old boyfriend, and she used once again. This was her journal entry after that relapse. She wrote, "Here I am, a new August, effing around with that same monster. Why is it after nearly a year I get so easily yanked back into its strong grip? It's been long over a year since the needle first pierced my arm straight through to my soul. After just one taste, I'm back, full-blown junkie pretty much. I despise what heroin turns me into, yet I feel this strange, threatening allegiance to protect our relationship. I forget the pros of living a sober life. What is it like to be free? I don't want to lie to mom or dad or Josh. They love me. Why is it so hard to love myself? God, I'm so glad they found me last night. It was that easy. And we understand that sobriety is a long-term commitment and people have relapses. It happens. But instead of getting up this time and dusting herself off and moving forward again with the skills she knew, she sank right back into the quicksand. I don't know if it was peer pressure or her answering the siren song of her old nemesis heroin. Promised her heaven but gave her hell. Cassidy followed heroin back into a sea of self-destruction. And we danced the dance all over again. The lies, the manipulation, her disappearing and reappearing, jumping from one using boyfriend to the next. Weeks became months and months became years. And about this time, in the middle of all the chaos, her addiction took a heavy toll on our marriage. Cassidy's dad and I divorced when she turned 18. She had somehow managed to have a few good months here and there, and in pursuing her passion for acting and modeling, she got a manager in Los Angeles that wanted her to move out to the West Coast. I was ready to move too after the divorce, and so she and I set off on this adventure, mom and daughter, following their dreams in Hollywood. We both thought a geographic fix would make everything better for Cassidy. She finally had a bright future that looked possible to her and everyone around her. This was 2012. She had been given her whole life on a silver platter: opportunities, auditions for major films and TV shows, an agent, a manager that believed in her, modeling gigs, beauty pageants. The whole world was hers for the taking. And even that wasn't enough to keep her from using. It didn't take long before she fell into the wrong crowd once again. It took one or two using, controlling boyfriends to enter the picture, and she was right back in the mess. She told herself that heroin was off limits, so she turned instead to other drugs, any drug, ketamine, meth, you name it, and she lost everything. At one point, she lived in the Roosevelt Hotel with a boyfriend almost twice her age, who had money and access to any party drug they could ever hope for. She started dancing in a strip club on Hollywood Boulevard because that's what she thought she was good for. The drugs took a toll on her appearance, her personality, her relationship with family and friends that cared about her. She stole from me, she used me, she sucked every drop of goodwill from me. She turned to extreme measures to get money. She had become a person that she hated, all because of a disease, all because her body and her brain were holding her hostage, lying to her that she needed the drugs that badly. It was a very dark time. She had brushes with death multiple times. She had stopped breathing after an overdose and CPR had to be performed to bring her back. She kept using. She contracted Hep C from a dirty needle. She kept using. She overdosed one time so severely that she lost her hearing temporarily. She was deaf for 2 weeks before her hearing slowly came back. She kept using. She spent time in jail. She spent time in hospitals with complications from the drug use, kidney infections, STDs, suicide attempts. She started using meth and cut her arms wide open one day in a fit of drug-induced rage and paranoia. She had multiple close friends die of overdoses. She would clean up for a bit and then time would pass and the siren would sing her song again, calling Cassidy to follow. Cassidy ended up moving back to Birmingham, Alabama, where her father was still living, back home. The hope is that he could help her get into treatment and away from her life in LA. But everywhere she went, there she was. There was a crack in the dark where a sliver of light could be seen for a split second, but nothing really changed. Cassidy got sucked back in a matter of months. It was too late by then. The substance use disorder was too far advanced, and any chance of remission for Cassidy seemed slim. In the next year, I also moved away from LA and back to my home state of Utah. I was across the country now from her and worried every day about her well-being and prayed that she could find recovery and ultimately life. Early in 2016, after a short stay in jail, she decided to use with a cellmate who made a few calls to have her friends pick her up when she was released. Cassidy ended up that night in a real life Breaking Bad situation. She ended up in a meth lab, heroin den type home, complete with someone duct taped to a pole who barely looked alive. She called her father in a panic to come and pick her up. He didn't know if he was being led to an ambush to be killed so that they could steal his money and his car. Her father, who would have gone to the ends of the earth for his little girl, was now trying to figure out if she was luring him to his death. He finally had the good sense to have Cassidy use her powers of manipulation to get a ride to the Waffle House, where he felt safe to pick her up in public. And when he got her in the car, he said, "Cassidy, I'm sorry, I cannot allow you back into the house unless you're not using." He was dying on the inside and crying on the outside. He drove his only child to a homeless shelter for women that night in Birmingham. And then he said, through a cracking voice and streams of tears running down his face, "If you don't stop using and turn things around, you will be dead within the year." That was painfully prophetic, a prophecy you don't ever want to think, much less say out loud. Time in a homeless shelter turned things around for a bit. She promised to get clean and get back into appropriate treatment, looking for a long-term solution to tackle her disease. And then another boyfriend, Frank. She seemed to be doing better with him, to have a purpose again, even if it was taking care of her new boyfriend. We believed that she had not been using for a few months by now. And then this happened. More lies about how she got beat up so badly. We knew it had to be her boyfriend. It still turns my stomach to see her bruised and beaten that way. And the sentiment that keeps running through my head, it always brings me to tears. And that sentiment is, we accept the love we think we deserve. The fact that she hated herself enough to accept treatment like this is the greatest travesty of all. This is what substance use disorder can look like. This is what mental illness looks like, which leads to self-medication that can lead to addiction. It's horrific. It's ugly. It hurts. 3.5 years ago, on November 10th, 2016, she and Frank got bored after he got paid, and they decided to use together. He picked up what he thought was heroin, but it turned out to be fentanyl. They both shot up just after midnight, November 11th. Frank woke up, and Cassidy never did. She was found face down on her knees with her head on the ground in the bathroom floor in a position known in yoga as child's pose. She was dead. The end that she never thought would come for her. It happened. Cassidy was 22 years old. I'm going to play for you the last few minutes of the video scrapbook from her memorial, showing her in happier times from the final years of her short life. This was our goodbye to her that day as we gathered with family and friends.
Fly away, little pretty bird. Fly, fly away. Fly away, little pretty bird. And pretty lay down, my dear brothers, lay down and take your rest. I want you to lay your head upon your Savior's brother's breast. I love you, oh, but Jesus loves you the best. And I bid you good night, good night, good night.
That was that was the lullaby that we sang to Cassidy when she was a baby. The last time I sang that to her, she lay in a wooden box in that funeral home. She was dead and stiff as I stroked her hair, kissed that cold forehead, and we sang that song to her one last time. It was our goodbye. So she's gone. All I have left of her are ashes in a plastic bag. Cassidy started out just like any of us. A baby, innocent, unknowing, dependent, beautiful. She learned to walk and talk just like all of us. Just like you, she had a family. She had neighbors and friends, teachers, co-workers, people who cared about her, loved her, believed in her. Don't leave your family and friends this way. The only evidence that you existed, the photos and fading memories of better days. Not a day goes by that I don't ache for my daughter. I mourn what could have been as well as what was. As parents, we're given the task, first and foremost, to protect our children. But parents and family can only do so much. It's each individual that must decide to live. It is you that must decide to see a future. It's you that must decide whatever happens in life, no matter how hard it gets, that you will choose life. Because if you don't, it can not only destroy your own lives, but the life of every person that loves you. You aren't that different from Cassidy. None of us are. But one thing you have that Cassidy lost is a future. That all died when she did on that bathroom floor. Her future was killed by the poison in that syringe laying next to her body. Let your life be different than where hers ended up. Your story isn't over yet, and there is time to write a new ending, any ending you like. Life can be unpredictable, and life sure as hell can be painful at times. I'm here with my daughter in a plastic bag. Nobody deserves to go through that. There's no guarantee that life's going to be easy. In fact, pain is inevitable. It's suffering that's optional. The key is acceptance. I also believe that the key lies in connection to others, reaching out for help, being vulnerable, accepting help, helping others. There are a lot of people out there that love you. I believe that each and every one of you have at least one other person that loves you unconditionally. And you, as much as anyone in the entire universe, deserves that love and affection. Accept it. It's yours. And then the real magic happens when you start to love yourself, when you start to forgive yourself. I tried not to judge Cassidy when we're in the middle of the chaos, but I'm embarrassed to admit that there were times when I did think she was just a bad kid. If I look at my daughter that way, then that's pretty messed up. Cassidy loved me. She never would have made a conscious choice to put that in jeopardy or destroy it. Her disease made her do it. I think that the key is compassion, understanding, and love. We're all in this together. Every person you come in contact with has a story of their own that you know absolutely nothing about. Possibly secrets, shame, maybe a dysfunctional family or mental illness. How about we start with less judgment and more love? Less shaming and more acceptance. I think that's the key. I received a message. Excuse excuse me while I get this up. I received a message from Cassidy in a dream after she died. And the message was this. She said, "It's okay to be okay now. We've all suffered enough. The time to heal is now, and this now has never existed. Don't worry, love saves everyone in the end. That love is inside you and surrounding you now. It's where I live, inside you. Love lives in you." And this is what Cassidy needed me to tell you today. It's all about love. And with love comes healing. Cassidy wasn't all that different from us. She was sitting in treatment 10 years ago, never imagining that anything bad could ever happen to her. She believed that her drug use was under control. She was wrong, and it took her life forever. She can never come back and try it again. So let's all learn something from Cassidy, because even though it's too late for her, it's not too late for you. Thank you for hearing the message today. Before I open up to questions, if any of you are interested, and I think they'll put it in the link in the chat, but I ended up writing a book about my story of losing Cassidy. It's called My New Normal, A Mother's Story of Love and Loss in the Opioid Epidemic. If anyone's interested in ordering it, they can follow the link to the website and buy it on Amazon. But I thank you all for listening to the story. It's too bad it wasn't a story of recovery, but I think there's still something for us to learn. So if we can, if we want to open it up for questions.
Yes, we will have time for that. Charla, thank you so much for joining the summit and sharing your story. I think all of us have learned something and hopefully can apply this to our lives. Had a wonderful opportunity. We do have, like I said, time for questions. If you want to turn your video and mute on, we could have more of a discussion to share comments, ask questions, or if you prefer to type it in chat and not show your video, if you're tearing up like me for a little bit, we are fine with that too. And me and Clara will be able to read those through, what you want to say about for the next 10 minutes or so. Clara, if you see anyone's coming in, do you want to just start reading them about their comments?
Yeah, I can do that. I can go through and read some of the comments that people have said, Charla, just so you can hear.
Mm-hmm.
So Sandy said, "Thank you so much for sharing." Trisha Glass said, "Thank you for sharing, Charla. It's not easy, but you are helping so many by sharing your story." And Red Pine RTC, they say, "Thank you for sharing your story and your daughter's story." Janet said, "I feel so blessed to have you share the story of your daughter. Thank you." Derry and Danny Thatcher says, "Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for giving us all a message of hope and love." Christine has said, "You have such a powerful message. Thank you for sharing. What suggestions do you have to help parents who go through this to support their child?"
I think
so the question that Christine has is, what suggestions do you have to help parents who go through this to support their
So I think it's a question I get all the time, and it kind of has to do with what I would have done differently, because I don't know that I did it perfectly. And I know I didn't. I mean, my daughter didn't make it. But I think what I learned from loving her and losing her was the importance of acceptance of our kids. That piece that it's so important to try not to judge them based on their behaviors, remembering that it is a disease. The week that Cassidy died in November of 2016, that was the first time a Surgeon General had come out with a report on addiction, calling it a chronic brain disorder and not a character flaw. So I think that began this conversation of, let's treat it for what it is, and that is a disease. It is not just some behavior issue. Yes, the behaviors that are part of this disease are unbearable, and they can be so hard to live with. But if you can love them through it all, listen to them, rather than punishing it out of them, try to get them help, support them, be there for them, be their advocate, because nobody else is going to be. Like I said, I think I judged Cassidy too harshly at times and felt like it was my fault. It's nobody's fault. It is what it is. It happened, and what do we do with it? I hope that kind of answers the question a little bit.
Thank you. I'm just seeing a few more as well, so we can have them coming through.
Okay.
This one, it looks like you have kind of answered it, just saying if there's anything you could express to another parent, what advice would you give? And you can share more from that. Just one other comment saying, thank you so much. I battled my own addiction, but watching my children battle theirs has been the hardest thing I have ever done. I often fear I will be awoken by a similar call.
Yeah, the whole time she was in active addiction, it's like I kind of prepared myself for that phone call. You kind of have to detach a little bit, or at least I felt myself doing that, creating better boundaries and almost preparing for that phone call. It's horrible to even think about, but when it came, it wasn't a surprise, but it was still gut-wrenching and awful. It's interesting that this whole idea of acceptance and viewing it as a disease and not just a character flaw or a behavior problem. I know a lot of the addiction community has tried to change some of the language surrounding it. And I think if we can remember that as parents, and I still don't do a great job at it, because when I speak, I find myself using the terms that I'm telling people not to use. One of the things is, rather than just talking about addiction, to talk about it as the disorder that it is, the name, substance use disorder, opioid use disorder. Also talking about, we use this term that they're clean when they're not using. And if we use the word clean, then what's the opposite of that? It's this judgment that we're putting on them when they are using. So perhaps another way to look at being clean is being in remission or not actively using substances. It takes away that behavior piece again and the judgment. I have often said, if I could have looked at my daughter's substance use disorder the same way I would have if she had had diabetes or cancer and gotten her treatment, and if the treatment community had opened their arms to that, like we do when we get treatment for someone who has diabetes or cancer, I think that could be a real game changer for substance use disorder. And I think there are small changes that are being made now. I think some of that has been put on the back burner with all the COVID stuff. And as we're seeing now, overdose deaths are skyrocketing again because people are isolating because they have to. They're in quarantine, they're locked down. And one of the biggest helps with people that are dealing with this disease is connection. feeling like they're part of the community.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you again. We can still have people submit questions. I'll be looking through the chat. One thing I was just thinking of, I know you mentioned this near the beginning, but you said something along the lines of when we hear your story, instead of saying we're sorry or what can we do to help, you said contact local people to change this problem that we have in our country. Who would you suggest that anyone contact that would be in their community?
Well, I think, at the time when we wrote her obituary, that was when naloxone just wasn't available over the counter. And so the call was to go to state representatives, to the people, because it was all controlled by the states. I think reaching out to any lawmaker is important, because that's where it's going to start. I think the change will start there. It's already starting to, a lot has happened now. It's hard because I think other than contacting local lawmakers, it feels like we're kind of stuck. Like, okay, what else can we possibly do? But I think if we have a story of our own, sharing it, starting in your own little family and your own circle of people that you know, changing the language that you use when you talk about addiction to your circle of friends and your acquaintances. It's like that, those changes I think are even sometimes more important than the contacting the lawmakers, because if we as a culture, a society, can look at addiction differently, that's when I think the real change will happen, because then we're approaching it from this place of love and compassion and non-judgment. And that's when treatments will be better. The medical community will look at it in a different way. I remember taking Cassidy to emergency rooms and always getting that look of, oh, she's just a drug seeker. The nurses and the doctors treating you like you're a second-class citizen because they think you're there just to get pain medication, which may be true, but it's still part of the disease. So rather than approaching it from that place of judgment, again, which all judgment does to someone suffering from substance use disorder is push them into the shadows and makes them live in a place of shame and embarrassment. And it pushes the families into the shadows. I felt like that as a mother dealing with a teenager who had substance use disorder. I felt like I couldn't tell the truth about what was happening with her. People would ask about my daughter and I'd make up something, you're not going to talk about, well, she's shooting up heroin, so yeah, she's doing great. You don't talk about it. But why not? Why can't we share? Why can't we be honest about what our families are going through and not have it covered with this shroud of shame and stigma? My hope for the future is that we can just stop the stigma that surrounds substance use disorder. I think it would be a game changer. So I think it's starting in a small way rather than feeling like we have to do something big outside of ourselves.
Right, that was perfect. As we're closing out, I just want to share a few things. Anyone is welcome to stay on here longer if they want and have some other questions. I'm posting a link back to the main room. It will be open for about another 5 minutes for anyone who wants to go back or has some general questions for the summit. Tomorrow we will be focusing on physical wellness with new Talking Circle breakout sessions. I'm also going to be posting some hashtags that you can use today if you take spiritual wellness selfies. We appreciate you for this session, which was brought today by Regents Blue Cross Blue Shield of Utah, Utah Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health, Utah State University Extension, and USU Extension Heart. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got most people off. I'm just going to stop the recording so you know there might be a little voice or whatever goes off to end this session.